The Washington Capitals are showing how to retool on the fly. The Montreal Canadiens are surging themselves into a playoff spot, and the Florida Panthers are going outside, but not really, on today's edition of Locked On NHL.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL. I am Nick Zararis, the host of Locked On Oilers. That's my good friend and my co-host, Hunter Hodies, the co-host of Locked On Penguins. We want to thank everyone who's making Locked On NHL their first listen of the day. Locked On NHL, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on today's show, a whole lot to get to. As we said at the drop, we've got surging teams in Washington and Montreal to hit on. The Panthers and the NHL listened to us about the Panthers and putting a Florida team outside in the state of Florida. So thank you for listening, Gary. We appreciate it. I hope you rated the show 5 stars on Apple or Spotify and you're subscribed on YouTube. So I want to start with Washington. Very by the seat of their pants win last night against Vancouver in the early game window. They didn't play particularly well, and they still found a way to win the game in overtime. And there are two ways to think about that. You know, you could do the glass half full thing of they didn't play well, but they still managed to win the game. Or you could do the glass half empty perspective of they didn't play particularly well. They're probably developing bad habits. They're probably cooling off a little bit from their strong start. And we're going to go to Locked On Capitals to start the show.
The Capitals win it in overtime by a score of 2-1. Hi, this is Dan Homey of Locked On Capitals. Well, this game was definitely a game for Pierre-Luc Dubois as he scored both of the goals for the Capitals, including the OT game winner. This game, Spencer Carberry tried to get the lines back to what we saw earlier in the season where they had more success, but despite bringing those lines back to what they were before, Ovechkin and Strome struggled to find consistency. The power play did not fare too well tonight, going 0 for 2. And taking a look at the game, all things considered, the Capitals got off to a strong start. But in the second and third period, the Vancouver Canucks greatly outshot the Washington Capitals. Logan Thompson stood on his head and made some great saves, including some saves without his hockey stick. I'll have much more on this for you later on Locked On Caps.
So, Hunter, coming into the year, we both liked Washington's offseason. They made interesting and calculated risky moves, and they've paid off very well for them. How do you feel about the Capitals so far this season? What are you impressed with? What are you most curious about?
Yeah, coming into this season, I liked what they did over the summer, but I still was on the fence. Like, I wanted them to prove me a bit wrong because, okay, they made the playoffs last year, obviously with that crazy goal differential, but I was like, okay, see if you can make the playoffs again this year. I had them out on the outside looking in because I thought the Islanders were going to do their normal stuff, Nick, and kind of, be in the race and then get that final playoff spot on the final day of the regular season. It doesn't look like that's happening right now with the way the Islanders have played this year. Obviously, there's still some time, but I still don't think that's happening. But the Capitals have blown me away with what they've been able to do. They're getting contributions from all over their lineup. Alex Ovechkin, even though he was out for over a month, he's still coming back and scoring at an insane rate. I mean, Nick, even though he's been out this year, he still might break the goal record by the end of this season. That's how hot he's been this year. Dylan Strome, he's been awesome. The way that they were able to sign him a few years ago before inking him to that extension, great work by the Capitals front office. They did a little bit of a risk by signing him. It worked out beautifully. And now look, he's one of the better, I would say one of the better top 6 centers, but one of the biggest storylines from this team, and Dan of Locked On Caps mentioned this, has been their goaltending. Charlie Lindgren and Logan Thompson this year have been awesome. And you know what, Nick? They barely cost anything. Yeah, they're going to have some decisions to make in terms of contracts for the goalies, but they don't cost anything, and they have been awesome. You look at Logan Thompson this year and Lindgren. It's basically been Swayman Ullmark for the last couple of years in Boston, kind of a 1A, 1B situation. Thompson has played 21 games, Lindgren has played 20. In Thompson's 21 games, I hate only using the win stat for goalies, but he's 17-2-2 this year with a .919 save percentage and a 2.32 goals against average. Every time he is starting, basically every time, the Capitals are winning games. he has been a rock. He was the biggest reason why the Capitals won that game. I was watching a lot of that game last night. Vancouver was really peppering Thompson all game long. I almost said Lindgren for some reason, but they were peppering Thompson all game long. He was giving no quarter. He made some crazy saves in overtime, especially when Vancouver was pressuring. And then Pierre-Luc Dubois was able to get the overtime winner about halfway through. And that was also a big calculated risk by the Capitals. They traded for Dubois. They sent out Darcy Kemper to LA. I even said at the time, man, I don't know about it just because of the way Dubois has played to start his career, but so far this season, Dubois has played really well. You look at this year, he's third on the team in points, 7 goals, 33 points in 41 games, right behind Protest and Strome. Strome actually leads the team in points, and he's been a really seamless fit. The Capitals front office has done a really nice job these last couple of years, selling off some assets, getting picks and prospects in return, but then, Nick, flipping some of those picks for immediate help to try and not only help Ovechkin get the goal record, but to try and potentially make one last deep run in the playoffs before he retires. I can't say enough about how good their front office has been.
And that's really all I ever ask for from a front office is show me creativity and show me that you're willing to try things. Don't be comfortable. That organization has their cup. They'll retire Ovechkin and Backstrom's numbers. Very well might retire Holtby's number 2. And John Carlson is going to be a fringe Hall of Famer, probably a retired number as well. Easily the most successful period in the history of the franchise. And they didn't rest on their laurels. They made some calculated risks. Chikrin, who I think his underlying numbers aren't as good as I kind of expected in light of the fact he's on a better team now than he was last year. Mangiapane has fit in reasonably well for them. And Dubois has been solid. Dubois is on pace to set his career high in points. Yeah. I think if I wrote it down, I wrote it down. He's on pace for 66 points this year, which would be 3 over his career high. And there are questions there as far as can he sustain this, but when you're in a conference that is as wide open as the East is right now, and you continue to not only, tread water with Carolina and New Jersey, you're setting the pace. You're 5 points clear of the Devils, and you've played 2 fewer games than them. And then real quick, one of the real benchmarks I look for when I'm talking about a team and how sustainable their success is, I like to look at their special teams because that's generally a good barometer of how much they can sustain bad play. At 5-on-5, you can go into a bad rut for a few weeks, but if you have good enough special teams, that can sustain you. And instead of going, 3-7 over the course of 10, you go 5-5, very similar, very reminiscent of what's going on with the Devils right now, where they went 5-5 over their last 10 games, but season long, their special teams are still really good. And that's a means of kind of preventing a massive fall off. And for the year, Washington has the 11th best power play and the 5th best penalty kill. And then over the last 10 games, they're running a 34% power play and an 83% penalty kill. And they've got goaltending that's 10% above league average in terms of save percentage. Everything is kind of lining up for them to stay where they're at. Now, I think we can all have an honest conversation about the high-end talent on this team in comparison to some of the opponents they're going to run into. And that's probably why a lot of people wouldn't take them seriously as far as being a Stanley Cup contender. But at the very least, this is a very impressive regular season from this group.
Yeah, they have been a little bit shaky as of late. The underlying numbers these last 10 games have been a bit below water. They had that great start to the season. I'm trying not to say that they're coming down to earth because they've had a really good season to date, but I think they're going through the motions a little bit. The fact that they were able to get that win over Vancouver despite playing really poorly goes to show, in my opinion, that this is a fairly good team in the league. Now, the jury is still out, Nick, on how far this team can go. Can they beat Carolina in a 7-game series? Can they beat New Jersey in a 7-game series? What about Florida? I think if they were to play a team like the Panthers in the playoffs, I would take the Panthers to beat them in a 7-game series. New Jersey, if everyone's firing on all cylinders and if the Devils play the way they have been defensively especially, I would take New Jersey. Carolina, that's a true toss-up for me in that series. I think right now, at least 2 teams I would take over the Capitals in a playoff series would be New Jersey and Florida. Otherwise, I think this is at least the third best team in the conference, if not a bit higher. This is still a very good team. Their front office is doing a great job. I expect them to also add at the deadline. And hey, again, Ovechkin might break this record this year, which is crazy considering that he missed so much time. But they're a really good story this year. They're playing great defensively. Offensively, they're getting contributions from everyone. They're getting outstanding goaltending. The special teams are there. Even if they were to lose, for example, to New Jersey or to Florida in the playoffs, like I was kind of predicting, I don't think they would make it easy on those teams at all. Those would still be very, and I mean very good series.
Completely agree with you. And then just want to shout out Alexei Protas and Connor McMichael, who are having really nice seasons. You know, I've watched a lot of the Capitals over the last 2 weeks. They played the Rangers. They played Vancouver last night on an off night for the Rangers and the Oilers. And Protas is really fast.
Their development system in Hershey, man, is really good. I mean, there's a reason, Nick, why Hershey is very good every year.
We're going to take our first break on today's show, and we're going to pivot to a team that is working on its development in the Montreal Canadiens, coming up after this quick break. If you guys know me from my time hosting Locked On NHL or Locked On Oilers, you know I love going to live events, whether it's sports or concerts. One of my favorite memories last year was going to see George Strait and Chris Stapleton. Nothing like a summer country show at a football stadium. The vibes, immaculate, feeling the sun, wearing overall, just chef's kiss. Now, Gametime has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, my friends and I were talking about what I wanted to do for my birthday, and we settled on going to Devils Golden Knights the day after my birthday. And using the Gametime app with Gametime Picks, we found some really good deals and could see the view from our seats before buying. The super deal was particularly impressive, offering great seats at unbeatable prices. Plus, the app's all-in pricing shows the total cost upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. So, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL with Hunter Hodies and I. And Hunter, we're going to throw it to Locked On Habs, but I'm very excited to have this conversation.
I know we think it's important that they won these last games because they're winning, but like the real benefit of that is that they have belief that the way that they're doing things can be successful. That's like such a huge mental hurdle to get over because like the rebuilds that never worked, Buffalo, they never had that belief that could happen. The early Edmonton Oilers, before they got the greatest player on the planet, they never had that belief, right? Like there's a lot of examples of those teams that never figured it out because they never believed they could figure it out.
They didn't trust the process.
They did not trust the process. And I think that matters a lot. Marty's process has been good. You notice how we're not talking about how they need to change defensive structure anymore? You ever notice how now they're just kind of good at it?
Because they bought into it and they executed it, right? Like,
and they didn't bail the second it got difficult.
Right.
That to me is what lands. Is Marty didn't say, no, we're not doing this because it's easy. We're doing this because it's the right thing to do.
So in talking about that, I do think that's important because coming into this year, no one expected the Canadiens to really make a ton of noise, but their goal was to show improvement, was to see steps from their young guys, to integrate some of their young guys like Lane Hudson, who we're going to talk about, David Reinbacher, who isn't going to end up playing this year, but they have a lot of young pieces they've acquired and accumulated over the last handful of seasons. And it's not just about winning right now if you're the Canadiens. The fact that they are winning, though, and sure, if you go under the hood, some of this is very much just a good run of form during a short period of time. But it does matter. Piecing together wins and having these young guys feel good about their game, that's really important when you're in a season that didn't really have a ton of expectations.
Yeah, the goal always for them this year was to show progress and to show their fans that, okay, we're heading in the right direction. While we may not make the playoffs here, and they didn't really have playoff expectations this year anyway, so I'm just going off that as they were heading into the season. But their goal was, okay, we want to show our fans that we're making progress and we're getting closer to being a Stanley Cup contender. And so far this season, Nick, there has been definitely a lot of ups and downs, but so far I do feel like they have shown some progress considering where they are in this innings. They've had a really nice run as of late. You look at their record right now, 19, 18, and 3, fifth in the Atlantic. They are firmly in the playoff race for that final spot in the Eastern Conference, as is almost every team that's around them. You know, the Penguins, you got the Blue Jackets, and even the Islanders are a bit below them. The Rangers are a bit below them. The Ottawa Senators, of course. A lot of teams jockeying for that final playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. But the way, for example, that Cole Caulfield has played this year has been nothing short of outstanding. 22 goals, 38 points in 40 games. He leads the team in goals. Nick Suzuki showing why he's their number one center. 12 goals, 41 points in 40 games. And Lane Hudson, man, he reminds me so much of Quinn Hughes of the way he dazzles in the offensive zone. If he's able to maybe fine-tune a little bit of his defensive game, again, just a bit, he's going to continue to blossom into a star defenseman in this league. He's been awesome. You know, even Montembeault, I liked his play last year. This year, he's hovering around 900, which is right about league average, 15-15-2 this year. He's by far their best goalie on the team. If he's able to up that save percentage to maybe 905 to 907, they'll be even better shape for the rest of the season, and they'll have a real shot of getting that final playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. But, you know, it's always good when a team, they're learning how to win. You know, when you're trying to get out of, you know, that, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, the basement, the bottom of the NHL, you're learning how to win. You're playing at high stakes games. That's what's important to them right now. And they are obviously having a lot of fun. Defensively, they were a mess to start the season. I mean, the Penguins put up a 9 spot on them in Montreal. They were booed off the ice in that game. But it feels like ever since that game, they've really tightened up defensively. And this has been a really fun team to watch as of late.
Yeah, the Habs are never boring. You know, when you're a team that doesn't play great defense, but you have a lot of offensive talent, it's great as a neutral party.
They're tightening up defensively, at least.
They're getting better, yes.
Yeah.
Their goals against and their save percentage are still pretty poor. They're both well below league average. But going and looking at the stats, you know, you've got Lane Hudson, who's in his first prolonged NHL run, and his defense, I think, will come along. I think the fact that he doesn't look out of place at the NHL level is a really strong sign. And it's really one of the good barometers as far as how well a player is going to do at the NHL level. Because for the guys who come in and the game looks too fast for them, sometimes that just never happens. The processing, the ability to get up to game speed, it just never comes for them. Speaking as somebody who watched the Rangers climb out of a multi-year rebuild, some of those guys, they never really developed that processing to be able to keep up with what the game looks like at the higher ends of things. And when you're in this kind of spot that the Canadiens are in, now you can take a step back. And Ken Hughes said it the other day, this doesn't change our plan. You know, we are sticking to our plan. And now, you know, if you hang around and you finish, you know, in the 4th spot out of a wild card this year, you can look at this and say, well, okay, maybe it's time we burn some of our excess assets and we go get an NHL ready player right now, or we go out in free agency, or we try and swing a big trade and we try and say, well, we're going to make the playoffs next year.
Yeah.
We think based on where we're at right now, if our young players continue to incrementally improve and we give them reinforcements, which that's something I do think that matters for a young team. It's kind of a vote of confidence, if you will, from the front office if they go out and trade for a proven veteran player, because it's telling them, hey, we see what you're doing. We appreciate what you're doing. Here's more help so you can get where we want you to go. I think that really does matter. And I'll be very curious to see what path the Canadiens do end up taking to do that, because that's one of the rites of passage of going from nice story to, okay, you're ready to compete again.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to happen during the summer. I think if they're still in the race, there's maybe a chance that they burn maybe a late round pick for a veteran if they can swing that at the deadline. But I don't think you're going to see them move a first or a second nick for like a big rental or anything like that. They're not obviously in the position to do that. You mentioned what Kent Hughes said. He's sticking to his plan. But I could see potentially over the summer them really taking a big swing here, you know, getting a really good player for a solid trade package in return, considering how many picks they have, how many prospects they have, and kind of telling these younger players, okay, we saw what you did this year, assuming they finished the year really well with the second half of the season, but them saying, okay, we saw what you did. We're happy with it. Now we brought in this player. We paid a lot to get him. Go out there and try to make the playoffs next year because we believe in you guys after the year that you had. I can see them doing that right around the draft, right around free agency. I probably lean towards a trade than I would a free agent signing, but I'm not going to rule out the latter one either.
Absolutely. We're going to take one more break on today's show, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the Florida Panthers kind of going outside, but not really. We'll be right back. From big upsets to game-winning drives, there's nothing better than the NFL playoffs with FanDuel, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. It's a jam-packed slate. It's Super Wild Card weekend. The Chargers at the Texans, where the Chargers are 2.5-point road favorites. Hunter Steelers heading to Baltimore to take on the Ravens, where the Ravens are 9.5-point favorites. Don't sleep on the Broncos heading to Buffalo, where the Bills are 8.5-point favorites. The Packers are 4.5-point road underdogs at Philly. The Commanders, 3-point road underdogs at the Bucs. And then Monday night, to wrap it all up, the Vikings, 1.5-point road favorites against the Rams. All of that over at FanDuel.com, and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make the NFL playoffs unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out with Hunter and I on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL. And we're going to throw it to Armando in a second. But again, Gary, thank you for listening. We appreciate you.
No more speculation. The 2026 Winter Classic is coming to South Florida. What is up, guys? Armando Velez here from the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, here to bring you the news that the Winter Classic in 2026 will come to Lone Depot Park on January 2nd, 2026, where the Florida Panthers will play the New York Rangers. And the Panthers, rewarded for their success after making 5 straight postseasons, which is about to be 6, 2 straight trips to the Stanley Cup final, and then their 30th season in franchise history, officially winning the franchise's first Stanley Cup. And for the Panthers, getting to this point is just to think that 10 years ago, the Broward County Commission voted 5-3 to keep the Panthers in the region. And now the turnaround of the franchise and getting an outdoor game, incredible. We're going to break this all down on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Your team every day.
So in talking about this, number one, we said last week, the Winter Classic is the NHL's way of throwing certain franchises a bone. You know, it's a reward for certain things. And in this case, the Panthers won the Stanley Cup. They've solidified their foothold in the state of Florida. And this is one direct way of saying, hey, good job, guys. We appreciate you. Thank you for winning. Thank you for sustaining your market. And thank you for stopping the conversation about, well, why are they even playing hockey in the state of Florida? Because that was a very real conversation. You know, we're not very far removed from obnoxious people posting 3/4 and half full pictures of the Panthers arena. Well, the team was good, you know, and winning cures all. It's really the truth in sports that if you win, people are willing to accept and forgive whatever impropriety or mistakes you've made. And it's really good to see the Panthers getting rewarded. You know, Bill Zito has been a very aggressive general manager who has consistently raised the bar for their expectations. And now, you know, the Panthers are primed to be a serious cup contender again this year. There's no signs of their immediate core breaking up. They locked up one of their key guys this past offseason in Reinhart, and it's just really good to see. It's not often I get to give the NHL kudos, but this is good to see.
Gary and Bill Daly definitely listened to our show last week,
Yeah.
man. Let's just again put that out there for everyone. They 100% listened to our show and our rants about the Winter Classic because they were able to reward Florida and go to a new location, which is going to be a lot of fun. And Nick, I saw your tweet yesterday. It's on January 2nd, the Winter Classic next year. So you're also not going up against the college football playoff. Kudos to the NHL for that. After this year, or this past year, excuse me, it was December 31st, and you're going up against Penn State. That's just, again, not a good idea, but they fully listened to us, and they're kind of going outside. They're going to have the roof closed, I would say, in the Miami Marlins Park, which makes sense. I mean, even though it's the winter time, it's still going to be fairly warm in Miami. You want to have that roof closed so you really don't have the humidity really be in there. And so you have the best ice conditions possible. It's going to be a lot of fun. You're going to hopefully sell out that game. The Rangers will help with that, Nick. You were talking about that with me before we recorded. Bringing a team there like the Rangers, who the Panthers just played in the conference final, makes all the sense in the world. The Rangers fans will come down for that. Obviously, the Panthers fans will all come out for that. It'll make for a good game, and B, you'll fully sell out. And then you're also getting the Stadium Series game at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa Bay with the Lightning and the Bruins. That's also going to be a lot of fun. I'm curious to see how that one works out because there is no roof over the stadium there. So I'll be curious to see how that works out. But still, really good move by the NHL here. I'm glad they're rewarding the Panthers because you said it, Nick. I mean, there was a time I remember when the Penguins would play the Panthers, even when the Panthers were still a fairly good team, it would be like 60-40 Penguin fans there in Florida. Now, what is it? At least there's a good amount of Penguins fans that come in, but there's definitely at least now more Panthers fans, especially with the way the Panthers have been playing, especially, of course, now that you said it, winning cures all. They're selling out every game there in Florida. And this is going to be a ton of fun next year. I'm glad that the NHL is doing this. There's been some talk about maybe the NHL doing one more Pens Caps Winter Classic, but that's probably going to wait until, if I had to guess, 2027, 2028, something like that. But I do fear the NHL cooked with this, as the kids like to say.
Two last things before we get out of here. Number one, having the Rangers in this game is your insurance policy.
Yes.
That if you piss off the Panthers season ticket holders, if these tickets are too expensive, which they probably will be because this is an NHL event, that all of the snowbirds who have second houses down in Florida and all of the retirees who live in Florida from the greater New York area will absolutely make the trek to Miami for this game. And then number two, I don't want to give the NHL too much credit because this is also a league that has underestimated the sun on multiple accounts for these outdoor games. So it's a good thing they can close the roof in Miami for this because they can try and limit the impact of the sun. If we all won't forget, the Lake Tahoe game that dropped the puck at 1:00, they played 8 minutes and then they came back at midnight that night. Last year, the Stadium Series game was supposed to start at noon originally, and it got pushed back to 3:00 to mitigate for the glare. So hopefully the NHL can figure out what most of organized society has over the last 5 to 10,000 years, and that the sun is predictable and has a certain pattern of cycles and can be accounted for properly. That'll do it for today's edition of Locked On NHL. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you happen to be listening on Apple or Spotify, you could help us out a ton by leaving the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell so you get notifications whenever new content goes live. Hunter and I will talk to you guys next Thursday. Until then, everyone enjoy the hockey.